I'm Roby Price, and welcome to my workshop.
I'm just back from Knoxville, A&M Supply. We got a load of maple in the back for drawer boxes. Got some plywood too, but it's only 1/4 of an inch. We're gonna be putting some pretty heavy loads in there, so we've got to reinforce the bottoms of these drawer boxes. Come on inside, let me show you what we're up to.
Office space. Part 4, a set of drawers.
Well, we're out of the truck, and as you can see, I've got quite a load. Keep in mind, we have 11 lower carcasses, and there are 4 drawers in each one of them. So, we do need a lot of plank to make this work. Each plank will give me a single drawer box, depending upon its width. I've got wider boards over here. They will give me 2, because I will eventually cut them into smaller strips. So the first step in this process is to get ourselves some board lengths that are a little bit more manageable. We're going to do that on the crosscut saw. Well, we've got our boards all cut to 4 feet, and that will make it a lot easier to handle them. The next step in this process is to get a straight edge on one side. Note I said straight, not square. We're not ready for square yet, but we do want a straight edge because the next step, we have to go to the table saw for some rips. And for that, I like a straight edge. Now, it's time to start getting our boards parallel. We're going to take that to the table saw. The largest or the widest board we need is 6 inches, so we're going to go for 6.5 to give ourselves some extra room. I am not going to select these boards for that. I'm going to select these boards for that because we'll get much more out of our material if we do that. If I can get a 6.5-inch plank out of this, that saves me all of this. I'll get 2 or 3 of the 3-inch planks out of this over here. This is going to maximize our material and minimize the amount of drop. We're going to start with this one. It's the biggest board I've got, which is exactly contrary to what I was saying in the last scene. Now there's a reason for this. I can get 6 1/4 over here, and I got 4.5 over here. This is the first place that I can go to make up a board or a plank. And I'm going to go ahead and do it now so we don't lose this. This is a prime opportunity. We'll get a lot out of this board and have very little drop. Now there's another thing I want to point out. I've got my hold downs over here and they do a great job, and they're going to push down on this, not this side, but this side. And you want to have it in this orientation. If you've got rough cut and it's not dimensioned and it's got a bow in it, put it like this. Let this side go down. When you cut it, this side is going to fall away from the blade. That's what you want. If you put it this way, and you hold this side down and you push pressure on there, when this finally goes down, the top edge is going to go into the blade. This is going to fall down toward the blade. That increases the odds of an event, albeit small, it's there. So just take this in mind when you cut a board. I always like the bow down, unlike the jointer where you want the bow up, and we'll talk about that a little more in a minute.
Here's another safety concern. The gap in the board here is the same width as the width of this table saw blade. As we move through, the width is decreasing until the ends touch. This is due to built-in stresses in the wood. It doesn't happen in every board, but it does happen. And this can cause the wood to pinch the back side of the blade, flipping it back up at you. The safety measure is to make sure that you've got downward pressure on your board and to have a riving knife.
Well, I've got all my boards cut up and they're all running about 4 feet long. That means I can get 2 side panels out of this board right here. Now, when I look at these boards, originally they looked like they were all in pretty good shape. And you know what they are? They're fine, but they are rough cut. And I am finding that I'm getting a lot of warping in these boards and some twist. So My intent was to take these after I got one side flat, two edges square over to the bandsaw, resaw it, salvage out maybe 3/8 material before I took the remnant to the planer and planed it out. Now I'm rethinking that because some of these warps are as much as 3/8. That's going to put a lot of that resaw into question. And I just can't see. I mean, this is over an inch thick. I cannot see turning an inch thick of material into shavings. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these in half. What does that do for me? It takes a board that's bowed like this and then all of a sudden brings it down there. It takes the bow out of the board considerably, and you don't have to joint out as much material. The trade-off is the snipe from the planer. Every board's going to have a little bit of that. And the other trade-off is once you cut them, you're committed. I can move that board around or that blank somewhere around in this here and kind of adjust where it falls in this, because I've got a little bit on top, a little bit on bottom. I can move things around. If I take all these and cut them in half, I'm really getting very committed. So when I have a knot hole in the wrong place, it makes it a lot more difficult. But when you balance out those items with the savings of material, I think I'm leaning toward the savings of material. So we're going to take all these boards, the crosscut saw, we're going to look at them pretty close, and we're going to start cutting them in half, or a semblance of a half. We have to look at the defects in the board. That's going to take a little while, but after that, we're back to the jointer, and we're going to shape these things out. Well, this gives you an idea of the magnitude of this project. There are 44 drawer boxes here, and all my pieces are cut, at least to very first rough dimension, and they're labeled, which is actually important too. Now the next step in this process is to face plane one side. And after face planing one side, we'll square up an edge, we'll rip it to final width, and then we'll square that up. Now I thought about doing an episode on how to use a jointer, because I've seen some things out there on the web that would almost indicate to me that most people don't know how. But I'm going to put that off for another episode. Just remember that when you joint, you bow up so that the front and the back are the first pieces to come in contact with the blades. These pieces are so stiff, it doesn't make a good display. You can joint long, flexible boards on a jointer and get a good, flat, straight face if you know how to use the machine. So we'll cover that in a future episode. Be looking for that. But for now, I've got a lot more work to do. Oh, I don't mind telling you, that took some time. We have all of our boards with a flat face, and I promise you they didn't happen on the first pass through the jointer. We've been at this a while. We don't have any square edges yet, and that's the next step, is to get one square edge. I've decided to keep it at one before we go through the bandsaw. We'll rip it and get the other square edge at that time. Now, another thing I'd point out is I have not been marking my boards here because it's pretty obvious to me which side has been milled. We will be marking our boards when we do this edge here because that won't be as obvious, and you always have to know where you've been.
Remember to check your fence for square. Not doing so is a Bush League mistake. We're also going to mark our boards so we know where we've been. On a thick board, I mark both sides because your ear doesn't always tell you when you engage both sides of the board. If there's a heavy slant, it may take 2 passes. I'm also marking the top and the bottom. That way, after the bottom is gone, I'll know I still need to mill the top.
Well, we've got our boards milled up. We'll at least one edge flat, another edge square. So we can come over here, we can start resawing. And I'm set up over here with my resaw fence. This is a poor boy's fence. It's got 2 clamps in the back over here that attach it to the table, nothing up front. And the fence that came with the saw is nowhere to be seen. We're not going to touch that. Now, one of the things that will allow you to do if you're just hooked up with 2 clamps is you can adjust for drift, the drift in the bandsaw blade very easily. Now, what is that drift? You kind of have to experiment to find it out. And but what I have found is there's a neat little tool right here. It's got a gap right here for the teeth, and I've got 4 little magnets. I can take that and I can put that right there, and the angle that it assumes is very close to the drift in the blade. Close enough that rarely, if ever, had a problem with it. Take a look for this, because this is a good item. You'll find it on the internet. So we have adjusted our fence accordingly. I've got a dog right here that'll help us keep the work close to the fence. Give us a minute, we'll cut some boards. Well, that's a lot of resawing. And all in all, it went pretty well. We had a few boards that had a crazy grain pattern that caused the blade to wander a little bit, but we're within tolerance. I think everything over here we can use. I haven't seen a board yet that's going to cause me to go to the back room and get another one. So far, so good. But look at what we have over here. All that material over there was what was cut off. Now, there's a lot of 1/4-inch material over there that is going to be perfect for small projects. And there's a lot of thinner material over there too that would make great veneers. I've seen a lot of curl over there, so we'll cull through that, and I think we'll find out that there's a lot over there that we can use another day. Finally, all that material over there, if I would to turn it into shavings, would be a monumental volume. I would be inundated. I've already got 4 bags of shavings now for what we started out with. I'd imagine we'd have had 16 to 18 had we gone ahead and aggressively set the planer and put all that into shavings, and it would have been a waste. So I'm comfortable with my decision to do what we've done. I'm starting to look at our drawer stock, and we're going to start looking at this with the aspect of the top drawers first. They were the smallest, they were done first. And that's where I want to begin this whole process of getting to final dimension. Now, we've got material right here, and when I took this and flattened this surface on the jointer, I didn't take off that much, 1/16 to an 1/8 in some cases. So we had a perfectly flat surface, and then on this side, we took off 3/8, and in some cases, not a 1/2 inch. I never got a 1/2 inch, but a lot more material was taken off on this side. Now let's think about what wood is. Wood is a semi-porous material that has a moisture content. So if you take off the skin, what happens? You get off-gassing from what wood you've newly exposed. That's just the way wood is. So we were very close to the surface on that side. On this side, we got quite a bit deeper. So what do you think happened? This side contracts a little bit. This side has already normalized. So when you put this board flat face down on the jointer beds, it rotates because it's cupped. This is now a cup, this is now the point. So we expect this to happen, and you should too. That's why there's extra material here. All these boards have to go back to the jointer. I need a flat face down here because when I put it through the planer, we take off the point, and then finally we get down to the outside edge where we have our 1/2 inch thick material. That's why you leave extra. That's also why you do these things in a series of steps to let the wood acclimate and normalize. So we're going to start looking at these boards, and we're going to take them to the jointer, and we're going to start massaging these on our way to final dimension. Now I'm going to do an episode on jointers another day. There's too much going on with this particular episode to dive into that tool. But another day, I'll show you some of the techniques that I use to get things down to just dead square perfect. Well, we've done a lot of face jointing. Keep in mind, we jointed all the faces flat originally before we went to the bandsaw, resawed our material. We've been back to the jointer again, and this face is flat, ready for the planer. We're set a 30-second thick. We'll make one pass, take it down to 1/2 inch, and make another pass to get ready for sanding and evaluation of our stock. Some of these got a little thin. We need to look at it after the fact.
With both faces flat and parallel, we'll touch up that edge one more time. And after we get where we want to be, we'll go ahead and rip the boards to width. That'll get us to final dimension with the exception of the length.
Well, I've got them all cut to final dimension with regards to the thickness and the width. And it was a long time coming. Remember, if you're going to salvage a lot of stock from rough cut material, there's going to be a lot of material handling involved and a lot of shavings. So let's talk about where we are and where we're going. Again, We're cut to thickness and width, but not to length. I want the additional length until the dovetailing machine is set. So that's going to be outstanding until that event happens. You might think that's where we're going next, but it's not. We're going to cut the grooves in the fronts and the side panels to receive the 1/4 inch material for the bottom. That's going to help us that's going to give us the visual cues for putting the dovetails in the right place, and that's important. Now, this 1/4 inch material, not real strong, and we're going to have to reinforce that for the bigger drawers, and I need a technique for doing that. So let me get out a couple of drawer slides, and let me show you why we need to reinforce this material and how we're going to do it. I've pulled out a piece of scrap right here, and I've set it between two of my bottom mount drawer slides, and this is about the right width when it comes down to it. So this is a good illustration. We have our panels going here and here, and they are actually below in this gap right here. If you've used these drawer slides before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We have this mechanism right here, which mounts up underneath, and we've got a couple of screws right there that will take and mount the front panel up to this unit, and we have hooks in the back here that will mount the back. So we're very secure in this. Now, if you look at the back panel, this is 1/4 inch plywood. I have another 1/4 inch up here. When I drill the hole in the back panel that receives this hook, at the end of the day, I've got maybe 1/8 of an inch material in there to hold it in good and tight. And that's about as little as I want. Any less than that, and it's looking more like a slot than a hole. So if I go to a thicker material, because this is starting to look a little thin for this span, this hole starts to diminish, and I don't feel as comfortable about where I am with this. 3/8 material, maybe, but find it. I've looked. It is very difficult to come by, and because of its rarity, the cost goes nowhere but up. 1/2 inch material, and I am hooked on the plywood and not into the drawer back, and I'm not really sure I like that. I really do believe when they designed these drawer slides, they had 1/4 inch thick material in mind. And if you look at the average kitchen drawer, it is not this wide. It's probably about this wide, which gets in the range of 1/4 inch plywood. So let's rethink this, and if we want to support this, and I think we need to, because if we're going to put any kind of a cast iron or heavy tool in here, we're going to need the support. We can't support this way, because at the end of the day, we really are riding on the drawer bottom here. So our only means of supporting it is across this way. Now, I would prefer to be underneath because I don't want to be restricted on what I put in here. So a couple of screws in here, and all of a sudden this dimension stiffens up immensely. A screw in the back, and now you've mobilized this back panel here. The front is a bit of a problem. I don't want to rely on the shear strength right up here up front. I think what we're going to have to do is mortise this in, and that's going to be our next step. We're going to start milling up some center supports, and when we put our dados in, we're going to start looking at a small mortise in the center here to receive these center supports. Remember all that drop? Consider this a drop in the bucket.
We'll take our center supports to the jointer, and from there we get one flat face. That's our starting point. We need to be firm against the fence to get our 90 degree. Be careful here, this is a small piece. Use blocks. All we need is one square edge, and then the thickness on the other two sides is simple work for the planer.
Our supports are done and they look great. They're about 3/4 of an inch wide, 1/2 inch deep. Now recall we have a 1/2 inch all around the bottom of the drawer on 3 sides. Back panel is above the drawer bottom. Now that 1/2 inch, after that we have the dado that supports the drawer bottom. In the back, I want to screw this into the back panel along with the plywood. Up front, I want to create a tenon on the front of this to slide into a mortise just below the drawer bottom. That will make for a rock solid joint, very strong, and a lot of shear. So that's what I want to do. Now, making the mortise is easy. I can do that with the shaper origin. And the dado can be done on the table saw. But making a tenon out of the front of this might seem like it's a little difficult to do up front, but it's not. We're going to take our jointer. I've dropped the bed right here to 1/4 of an inch. All I have to do is slide this piece through. What's left will be 1/4 of an inch, and that's our tenon.
All of these tenons were made this way with the exception of one. I took the guard off so you could see how the jointer works. I find this very interesting. Note that the end of the tenon matches up with the outfeed bed.
Well, my dado stack is in the saw. I've got my initiation blade plus the smallest infill. That works really well for this 1/4 inch plywood that isn't 1/4 of an inch. Now, my rollers are set for the height of the stock. It's just time to get busy. I have been spending some time working with the dovetailing machine on the small drawers. I wanted a pattern that would work, and my stock is long, so if I didn't like what I started with, I could lop off the ends and get there again. Now, we have our pattern set up. It works fine. This is what I wanted, and it's time to start cutting these things to length. So in order to do that, in order to double check myself, I have put my undermount drawer slides in the carcass. And I'm kind of glad I did, because I don't have nearly as much adjustment in this little mechanism as I thought I did. So what I'm finding is we need to be pretty close to these rails right here. And those rails are roughly 16.5 inches apart. Now, that's a hard measure. It's probably too tight at that. Let's give ourselves an 8, make it 16 5/8 for the inside of the box. Now, we've got 1/2 inch stock, so there's 17 5/8 for the outside. That'll be the front face. The back face is 17 1/8 because we have a 1/2 inch dado on each side. With this in mind, we're in good shape to be able to cut the front and back panels, and that's what we're going to do now.
We'll cut one side square, flip the board, then using our gauge, we'll cut the second side to length.
Well, the dovetails are going in nicely. I've got the first set of drawers done, and the big trick about this is to stay organized. Now that we have this first set done and we've got a routine down, let's take a look and see how we work this out. But there will be a prevailing theme in this whole thing. Stay organized. If you can do that, you'll move through this whole process without any hiccups. Well, when I said stay organized, I meant it. I've got myself arranged here, and I'm about as organized as I think I could get for this particular task. All my front panels are cut to final dimension. All the widths are just right. The back panels that would be back here, they're cut to final dimension as well. We just have them stored back there out of the way. Now the side panels, they are long, but the front faces have been cut square. Finally, these are all oriented such that it facilitates me putting them into the dovetail jig just right. And all that's part of trying to hide the dado right here. This dado is what holds the drawer bottom in. You cannot see it from the side, but you can see it from the front. And that's what we wanted. The front face is going to get a face, so you'll never see it at all. Now the dovetails are organized for this height drawer. And when we go ahead and set ourselves up for something that's a little taller, we have to take a couple of things in mind. The same spacing that allowed us to hide this dado right here, when we adjust our dovetails, we've got to consider this from the other side, because this particular piece right here, that dovetail was placed specific for this orientation. We're going to turn this over, and then we have to do it from this side. So you've got to do it from both sides. You've got to make sure that when you cut your dados, your spacing is right both on top and bottom. Come on over to the jig. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, I like this spacing right here. I've got about the same size gap on either side, and this right here is lining up just even with that. When I turn the board over, I'm going to get the same type of configuration on the other side. And that will allow me to get a good match on both sides of these dovetails and hide this dado.
This is called a slip fit.
Well, that's a lot of dovetails, and they are all machine tight. This was a good fit up here. All of them are uniform. I've got my dados in the right place. I couldn't be happier. So what's next? All these sides are long, and they've all got to be cut to length. But first, I've got to do some cleanup. That'll take place behind the scenes. Well, this is the first 44, and I wanted to get some assembly done today. After I got this assembled, I was going to start cutting drawer bottoms, but I wanted to give it a try first. And I put it in my carcass over here, and the front fits great, and the back doesn't. I don't know if you can see this, but this back panel right here, 1/2 inch too short. Somewhere along the line, I got a digit, decimal, comma, or semicolon out of place, and I have cut this too short. And it's an absolute shame because when you look at the dado right here, the fit is magnificent. And that is all for naught. Now, recall earlier I said, I don't have any extra boards, at least not what I purchased. So I have gone to the back room and I have scavenged, and I have found a couple of boards, and I have already remilled up some stock, but it's not as thick. We are looking at 3/8 here instead of 1/2 inch, which means I'm going to put a slot in this and get this dado redone, give that a little bit of time, and we'll recut it. Now, 3/8 is mighty thin for a drawer, but it is the back, it's not structural, and I think we can get away with it without too much trouble. If this were a client, I'd be getting some more timber, but as it is, I've recut everything, and I want to show you a technique for sizing this back panel that I didn't use. By the way, I did measure this twice and 3 times, and I still got it wrong because I wasn't thinking right. And sometimes a visual measure is what you need. When you're doing a dovetail drawer with a dado in the back, where the dado is 1/2 the thickness of your drawer stock, this is how you do it. You take your dado front panel section right here with the tail, you bump it up against your stock such that the inside right here is even with the blade on this side. So that if I were to take this and push it through, I would cut off these tails, but nothing else. And that's how you cut it to width, because then you are just 1 stock length shallower than the front. And that's a 1/2 on each side, and that's where you want it to be. This is what I should have done, and this is what I'm getting ready to do now. I'm just doing a test fit on the first one. I have put this together. It is just held together with friction. And I have my back panels all milled up again. They look pretty good. I have the bottom cut to width. This is the first one. I haven't cut the rest of them yet. I wanted to get a test done. And as you can see, the fit up is good. I have not cut this back right here. So the next step in the process is we've got to get all these bottoms milled up. And then we have 2 more steps after that. We've got to put the holes in the back so that the undermount drawer slides can fit in. And we have to put in this center support. We'll do that next. One of the last things we need to do is put in the mortise for our center supports. Recall we made the little tenon here on the jointer. If we take our front panel right here, and of course there's the dado that supports the drawer bottom. If we put a little bit of a mortise right there on the bottom, with the top of the drawer being the top of the mortise, we'll be in good shape. Now this is just a slot cutout, and we're using the shaper origin to do that, and the shaper plate is placing it for us. I have the bottom support here, and I have it centered on this piece. It's just a matter of pushing a button and cutting it to depth. Well, space is a bit of an issue. We have 11 of these all sanded down and ready for assembly. We'll go ahead and assemble them 11 at a time and then store them in the carcasses, which are currently residing in the study. So the reason for sanding all these ahead of time is, if you've ever built a drawer before, you know that sanding the inside of a drawer or a cabinet is next to impossible. So that was the reason for the sequence. Now let's get on with this and get some of these things put together.
I am only putting a coat of glue on the tails. I find that I get a lot less squeeze out on the inside of the drawer when I do that. I'm not starving the joint, but I am being very careful to apply just enough glue. The dado in the back gets a coat of glue too, paying special attention to get some glue in the corner of each dado. That'll help a lot with getting a good joint. The front face goes in first, and because it's a slip fit, that's an easy prospect. The drawer bottom is next, and we make sure we get a good seat with the bottom in the dados on both the side and the drawer face. The back panel is installed in the dado. After applying the glue, we install the final side. Things are a little finicky at this point because everything has to fit. We'll put it in the clamps and check for square. Our center support gets a bead of glue. I want the bottom plate and that support to act as one unit. I slide the tenon into the mortise, and I want to make sure that it's square with the rest of the drawer before I lay it down on the bottom of the drawer. We will pre-drill for a 1-inch stainless steel screw. This not only secures the center support, but it keeps the drawer bottom secured against the back panel of the drawer. The drawer bottom gets 2 more screws in the back. I need the bottom of the drawer to stay tight against the center support while the glue dries. To do that, we'll put in 2 additional screws. Those are best drilled out from the bottom. That way I know where the support is. And I'll turn the drawer over, countersink, and then install the screws. We'll put this aside and let the glue dry. Only 43 more to go.
Our tails are proud, as are our pins, and that's important. If they were shallow, I'd have to take the whole board down to the level. As it is, I've just got to sand these down. But I don't want to go too far because I want to maintain that straight look. So we'll mark in between. We're using 80 grit paper, so this is going to happen pretty fast. Well, before we get into the sanding, we need to address this sharp edge right here. If you look at your drawers in your furniture, all of them have a little bit of a round over. It varies. Some of them are a complete round over. Other ones are just something to take the edge off. All this helps with finish. Finish likes rounded contours because on a sharp edge, it will just, finish does not like sharp edges. So keep that in mind. We are going to round over the interior of this full drawer. We are not going to round over this face right here. There's a face plate that goes on top. And if we round this over here, it'll collect debris. I'm not going to worry about this back edge because nobody's going to see it and nobody's going to touch it and it's not going to get any abuse. And if somebody's looking at the back side of your drawers for a rounded edge, I think you know what to do. Now for this, I like to use a handheld router. I have seen people use a router table on this and it goes pretty fast, and I've done it before that way too. I have just picked up this one. I like this way it works. So I have the smallest round over bit I've got in here, and it's got a small little bearing on top. I think this is 3/32. Now just take this slow. You need to maintain level. I like to go back and forth so I get 2 passes. At the end of the day, it's pretty forgiving because keep in mind, we're going to be sanding these surfaces down as well as the tops to the finer grit. We don't have to touch the insides except for the round over sanding. So all this is going to come out in the wash. This really gives us a good start on this. I like this radius, but we got a lot of drawers to do, so let's get busy.
We are only sanding down the sides. Recall that the front plate gets a face plate. And the back of the drawer, well, you've heard my opinion on that already. So this should go pretty fast. We'll start with 100 grit and then move to 120. You have to address that top edge, and the first step is to take your sander and just run around the perimeter a couple of times. That rounded edge needs a little attention. The mill marks are still visible, so we're going to go ahead and take some sandpaper. We'll start with 100, go to 120, and we'll address the rounded edge and make sure that it's good and smooth. A little bit of air to clean them up. This is dusty work.
Well, that's the last one. 44 drawers all sanded down to 120. And that's going to be fine for the pre-catalyzed lacquer finish that we're using on the drawers and our carcasses. This was a good project. It was a long project. Taking all this wood down from rough cut and getting it all dimensioned took a lot longer than I had anticipated, but the results are great. I've got 44 drawers, they're very tightly dimensioned. I don't think we're gonna have any trouble when it comes time to mount these in the carcasses. One of the things I want to point out is this center strip. This right here, this gives the drawer bottom an incredible amount of strength. Recall, that's 1/4 inch plywood, and it is not particularly strong, but with that center strip, I'm not going to worry about putting anything I want to in there, including power tools. So I think this is a good option. It's something that I've wanted to experiment with for a while, and because it's on the bottom and not the top, I have the full use of the drawer. This was a good add. Now, as you might imagine, these drawers can't stay here. I need the space to work on the next part of the project. So we're going to be putting these inside the carcasses. That's for next time. We'll get them all mounted, and then after that, I think we're looking at finish. So that's what's on tap next time, and I hope you'll join me there in Roby's workshop.